If you are on your loose leash walking journey and would like a dog walking like Gigi here, this is going to be the video for you. There's a ton of different equipment that's out there. So what we're going to do in this video is just go through a bunch of pros and cons about all the different pieces of equipment. If you haven't met me before, I am Kristen from Salty Pack. So a caveat to this whole conversation is no equipment teaches your dog how to stop pulling. None of it teaches your dog how to loose leash walk. Most of the equipment that we have available to us is just going to come down to comfort for you and your dog, of what you're comfortable with using. And again, every piece of equipment has some pros and cons. We'll give some alternatives to some of the ones that have maybe a few more cons than pros. But remember that when you are teaching your dog how to walk nicely on a leash, doesn't necessarily always come down to equipment. There's ones that we favor a little bit more than others, and we'll break down some of the controversial ones in this video as well too. But remember that if you are training your dog how to loose leash walk, equipment is just one piece of the puzzle. So hope you enjoy this video, and if anything, if you have any questions or anything, just always leave a comment, and we'll see you at the next one. Okay, so probably the very first piece of equipment that most people are gonna have readily available when they get their puppy or bringing a dog from a rescue home or something is, is the very humble, just static leash, just a normal clip leash, and our normal regular collar. Now there's also different pieces, different kinds of flat collars that we might use, so I just consider this a flat collar. The flat collars that I tend to prefer to use are going to be ones with buckles. So that's where we have different holes that we can make sure that it stays nice and snug on the dog. When we use a flat collar, we do want it to sit as high and nice and snug up on the dog's neck when we're going for a loose leash walk. The reason for that is we want to make sure that it doesn't fall down to the really chunky bits where there's lots of muscle, that there's not going to be as much feedback between our dog. And with the flat collar, if you get the ones that are very easily adjustable, what tends to happen for most people is just over time, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I have seen that if we don't readjust it quite regularly, that it can just get so big that it slips up and over the dog's head, which a lot of people have a little bit of PTSD with. So when we use a flat collar, I much prefer a buckle collar to make sure that it is securely fastened, tucked in, and then we have a spot that we can put on obviously our clip as well too. So the benefits of using a flat collar is most dogs have one. They're usually wearing it at home. A lot of people do run their dogs naked at home, in which case it's not that big of a deal. But a lot of people just have their dogs on collars. So it'd be nice to just pick up a leash, clip it on, and away you go. So ease is probably the biggest thing for flat collars. It's one of the most readily available pieces of equipment that you can find. Almost every different kind of leash or collar maker is just going to make a flat collar, right? It's just one of the most common things that most dogs will have. People tend to have them on with the identification tags and things like that. You can get really creative ones that have customization and things like that. It doesn't have to be anything that's super fancy. This is from my Malinois. It's just a black buckle collar, right? So the downfalls of them is kind of like what I mentioned before, is with the loose leash walk in particular, when we're giving that feedback, oftentimes, because it does need a level of having a bit of room to move, oftentimes it just will kind of fall down to the base of the neck, or even worse, on that trachea, where you can kind of hear that voice change. You might have even tried walking your dog on a flat collar and you hear that hacking noise. A lot of dogs won't figure out that if they just loosen up the collar, it's not going to be so difficult, and that's a whole different conversation. But the flat collar does pose a little bit of those just risks to be aware of. So coming down to the base of the neck, there's going to be a lot of muscly bits. A lot of dogs will tend to pull through it. In fact, some people who do bite sports or any sort of sports with their dog, they might actually use a flat collar to promote pulling to increase drive. Again, a whole different conversation. So one person's detractor is another person's benefit of using it. So the pros of the flat collar, just very easily accessible. Cons of it, doesn't tend to sit in the place that we want it to for the most part. So that's our regular flat collar and our regular static leash. The next piece of equipment that we can use for our loose leash walking, which seems kind of counterintuitive, is actually our long line. So most dogs who go out on a really short, like maybe 1.5 meter leash, 6 foot if you're watching from America, is when we go out for a loose leash walk with our dog, it's kind of like the only big outing that they've had. So what our long leash can do is actually give dogs freedom to explore. And then over time, once they've kind of explored that space, like say you're at a park or an empty field or something like that, you've got them on the long leash, they've done all their sniffing, they've done all the things, then you can kind of use the long leash of every once in a while when they kind of come into your space, you just give them a little reward. They can kind of bop back out and then come back in. They go, okay, well, this space now is actually quite uninteresting, but mom and dad, they're actually quite interesting. And so having a little bit of that choice being able to be made for the dog with the long leash, some people use that quite a lot for their loose leash walking by using a long line. The benefits of that is it creates a lot more choice for the dog. They're choosing to stay within the space of you that you would like them to be in that loose leash walk eventually. But the downfall is it just takes quite a long time. Sometimes people find that the long leash can be really difficult to manage, particularly if you can't handle a short leash. It's going to be very difficult to manage a longer leash. So just something to get used to anyways as you're getting into that, if this is the piece of equipment that you choose to use. You would also need a flat collar probably for this one. I wouldn't recommend using like a Halti or anything like that, and we'll kind of get into that maybe a little bit later as well. So just a long leash in terms of how long it needs to be. How long is a piece of string, right? It's as long as you want it to be. It can be anywhere as long as just like 3 meters up to 20 meters, right? Depends on how much space you have, your dog in particular, how much freedom that you feel like they can handle. Some dogs might not be able to handle 20 meters of freedom at the moment, so we might need them on a shorter leash. The benefit of having a really long leash is you can kind of make it work for you at different lengths. So just because you have 20 meters of rope or a leash, of some sort, it doesn't mean that you have to go all the way to the end of it and give the dog the entire freedom. You can work that around. And we made a video about how to manage the leash. We'll make a video on how to manage the long leash as well too. So some benefits, some detractors. This one's really great as well too. If you're looking to do recall with your dog, which is a whole separate thing, use a long leash. All right, this next one might be a little bit controversial, but we also have the very humble Flexi leash. It's very divisive. There was probably a big movement, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago or something, that the Flexi leash kind of had this it was almost the enemy of dog training. The Flexi is awesome. It's so easy to use. So how the Flexi works, if you've never seen this before, and Flexi is the brand, but it's kind of like Kleenex is now like, hey, can I have a Kleenex? You want a tissue? Flexi is the brand, but it's also what we kind of call like Flexi leashes. There are different brands for it. Flexi, the brand, is probably the only one that we recommend. It's just one of the better quality ones. We've seen a lot of them break over the years, and what you want is like a more tape-like Flexi leash, not one of those skinny kind of rope leashes. They tend to break or get tangled around and stuff. So how this one works is if the dog is clipped onto, the Flexi is clipped onto the dog's collar, this basically, unless you lock it out, is going to just flex around wherever the dog is moving. This one is at 8 meters. You can get them, I think, at 3 and at 5 meters as well too. And so if the dog is kind of sniffing and you're continuing to move, the dog just moves off with you. It comes in and it comes out unless you lock it out. Where Flexis got their bad name was probably the people who just put their dog on a Flexi and it just took the entire edge of the Flexi and it just hangs out there. They have no control over it or anything else. So with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. So when we recommend using Flexi leashes, there's probably an element of the dog has some sort of engagement with you. We don't want them fully at the end of the Flexi just doing whatever they want to do at the edge of it and having no engagement back with you. So you should have some level of recall, some level of disengagement from the environment before you click onto one of these ones. So that's kind of the detractor, is you might need a little base of training for what we would recommend you use a Flexi for. But the benefit of the Flexi, it's super easy to handle. They're pretty lightweight as well. And again, the smaller that you get, the lighter they are. There's even a giant one that sits a little bit bigger than this one as well too. But for most dogs, it provides a level of freedom that you can also provide a level of control as well too. Another downfall of the Flexi is it doesn't give you as much control. So with the lockout, it goes from going to stopping really quickly. With our long leash, for example, we can be a little bit more nuanced as it goes out. We can kind of sort of put a little bit of tension on it so it's not such a hard stop on the dog. And that will help out to definitely ensure not to have any like injuries of whiplash and things like that. But the Flexi is wonderful. I love this piece of equipment. Do I recommend it to very many people when they're loose leash walking with their dog in the same way as like the long leash? Not often. It takes a little bit longer to teach your loose leash walk. But again, for a dog that might need a little bit of freedom, you might start off with your Flexi. Hey, have a little bit of a sniff around, do what you need to do. And then we might take the Flexi off and then go back into our structured loose leash walk, for example. One way to use it. Rolling through with our theme of leashes, we have a bungee leash. Now, a bungee leash is actually one that I pretty much just full stop don't recommend for loose leash walking. What I do recommend a bungee leash for, because I have one myself, is for running. So any sort of activities that you do, like it's okay for the dog to pull a little bit more, particularly dogs doing, again, sports as well too. This holds a level of tension and tightness that as the dog pulls, it actually gets a little bit tighter, which can build up a little bit of frustration and or increase the drive to go get the thing. So we can use these really tactfully. I personally use it for running with my dog. So he, like matching pace for us on a run, he's gonna be much faster than me, of course. I'm still keeping up with him. But as we're running, if he goes, like we're getting pretty good about finding the pace together, but as he goes a little bit further, we can have that little bit more, but it does kind of pull him back a little bit for me. The big downfall of why we don't use this for loose leash walking is really there's just hardly any feedback. So if you've ever tried to give feedback on a bungee leash, it's just going to get lost in translation essentially through the bungee leash. So for loose leash walking, it's not one that we recommend. What it is really good for as well too is just saving your shoulders. So again, there's pros and cons to everything, but I think this one has the biggest con of not really giving you very much for the loose leash walk anyways. So again, with that bungee leash, great for doing some of your running activities and things like that that you might need to take a little bit more of that, or the dog can take a little bit more of the impact. This could also be used for like sniffari walks, where you're not working on your loose leash walk, but again, you're saving your shoulders. If the dog's bopping around at the end of the bungee leash, you can save your shoulder for that. It's clear as they're on a different piece of equipment, for example, that we'll get into probably in a different video as well. But that can be a benefit of using the bungee leash. Pros and cons. The last that I've got in terms of our leash journey that we will go through is a slip leash. This could be a slip collar as well too. The collar is just going to sit a little bit smaller and it's going to have an attachment point that you would just put your normal static leash attached to the top of that one. The slip leash is a wonderful piece of equipment. What it does that makes up for what the flat collar does not do is it usually has a little stopper just up here. So like I mentioned with that flat collar, we want it to stay up as high underneath the chin and just behind the ears, but oftentimes with that flat collar, it is going to fall down. With the slip leash, once we get it appropriately fitted, we can have a much more snug slip leash just underneath the chin and just behind the ears, with a little bit of movement as well too. So this one has two stoppers so that it doesn't actually get any tighter than that. So you can have this level of movement with your dog on a walk. And so what the slip leash does is it teaches more of a pressure on and a pressure off system. So we might start to teach the dog that when the pressure goes on, what I want you to do actively is learn how to turn that pressure off. Benefits of the slip leash, it's going to be a little bit safer in terms of staying up nice and high underneath the chin, just behind the ears. So most of the time, it doesn't have a chance to fall down onto that trachea. You could even hear my voice change as well too, that the flat collar does. Another benefit of the slip leash is just a little bit more sensitivity with that feedback, particularly as it sits higher up as well too, but also in the way that if this is my static flat collar and this is the dog's neck, this is a very dramatic representation of it. But as the dog finds that tension on the flat collar, there's always going to be a little bit of space just behind the neck that we're trying to give that feedback for. So what the slip leash does is it tightens up all the way around, but also loosens up all the way around as well too. So our feedback is much more delicate. We don't have to use as much pressure sometimes to get our point across. And the reason that I like the slip leash and the flat collar is they're more directional type of tools. So I can basically, wherever the head goes, the body will follow. So that is kind of the idea of using the slip leash and the flat collar as well. It's a lovely piece of equipment for leash walking. We use it for most of our dogs. So if you asked me a preference for most dogs, we'd probably aim for the slip leash. because most everybody has gone through other types of pressure before with their dog, that this one just becomes kind of the only remaining one. But it is just a lot more nuanced in the way that we can use it. We can be a lot more delicate. So more of like a whispering conversation rather than sometimes it feels like, you know, tactile, we're yelling at the dog through the flat collar, for example. So that's the slip leash. Downfall is it still will tend to fall down the neck quite a bit. Not quite a bit, probably like 3 times a walk maybe. But once you get to a nice loose leash walk, it really shouldn't. So every once in a while you will just have to bring it up a little bit for that dog. So slip leash, really it has so many positives. Other detractors, some people just don't like the way that they feel or look. It's another detractor for you. So again, when choosing your piece of equipment, a lot of pet shops will have them available, just something that you should go and have a feel of, make sure that you're comfortable with. Again, the sister to the slip leash is just the slip collar, so that if you're using different types of leashes, for example, maybe you want the short leash for your loose leash walk, but you also have a longer leash to let them go, have a sniff, like do all their things before you do their structured walk. The slip collar might be a better preference for that situation. All right, and as we move through different kind of pieces of equipment, we're kind of done with all of our leash type of stuff. The next one that we have is a harness. Harnesses can be really beneficial for some dogs for their loose leash walk, but for most dogs, it's not going to be the best option. Reason for that, so there's gonna be plenty of different iterations of a harness. I prefer the rough wear equipment. I find that it lasts quite a long time. It's a little bit more on the expensive rate, but again, I have never had to fix my rough wear because it's broken for any defaults and things. So how harnesses are mostly going to work is the dog's head is through here, the legs come down through here, and then this attaches underneath the body up and around here. Again, plenty of different iterations. This is a pretty common one. So this is your chest plate that sits right over the chest of the dog. And then most of the time we've got a clip on the back here, or there's sometimes a clip on the front as well. So harnesses do have a place in dog training. For me, it's not usually for the loose leash walk. Most of the time when we clip it onto the back clip for the harness, it is going to create a little bit of that pressure and tension for pulling. Harnesses were pretty much invented for safe pulling. So this isn't the one that I use for my dog in particular for search and rescue, but when he's in his search and rescue harness, if he's pulling me to the start line because he's like, no, I feel like there's somebody right here, I would like him to do that, and I have a safe harness for him to pull through. So for me, a harness is something that I don't mind if he pulls through it. For me also personally, if I go for, like I mentioned, that sniffari walk, where I'm not doing my structured leash walking, but it's more of, hey, just go and sniff things. Like if he pulls me over a little bit, I really don't mind, right? It's safe for him as well too. So harnesses do have a place. We will use it in a way of not loose leash walking, but fulfilling dogs' needs and requirements elsewhere. There are the occasional very sensitive dogs who don't like pulling through a harness, so it's totally fine for that piece of equipment to be used. But again, that back clip harness tends to create a little bit of drive and frustration if we don't use it in the appropriate way. The front clip harness, for some dogs can be like a very weird pressure for them. So for some dogs, works fantastic. How that works is if the dog, so if their leash is clipped here, and if the dog starts to pull a little bit, kind of their body almost twists backwards, and some dogs are like immediately, no, this is not the way that I want to walk. And it becomes very uncomfortable for them very quickly. In that case, fantastic. We've found a tool that helps to stop pulling, right? Doesn't happen with many dogs, but it can happen with some dogs. For whatever reason, a lot of golden retrievers sometimes tend to find that the kind of sideways pull just is very aversive to them for whatever reason, and it gives them a nice loose leash walk because they don't like the feeling of it. But most dogs will tend to just figure out, oh, I just walk really funny, but I can still keep pulling to the things that I want. So again, by the time that we are in most people's homes, that is their experience with the front clip harness. Harnesses, the benefit of them is it is a safe way for a dog to pull. So if you want to do any like weight pulling sports, if you want to do running with your dog, I recommend using a harness. Anything that you feel like the dog is going to be pulling you a little bit, harnesses are definitely going to be the best thing for that. In terms of what harness you get, preference. I don't want anything that restricts the movement of the dog. So oftentimes now there's kind of these newer harnesses that come over and wrap around kind of the front to shoulders of the dog. For us ladies, that's kind of like walking in a pencil skirt. So yes, they might not be pulling, but it's because they don't have full range of motion. Just be aware of all of that as well too. So there is some of the downfalls of some of the harnesses that we use. And again, for loose leash walking, it's not one that we recommend generally for our clients for loose leash walking, but it can be a way to fulfill the needs of ticking the box for our dog in that category so that we can ask for our structured loose leash walk in a different context. The next one is a Martingale collar. It's sort of like a flat collar, sort of like a correction chain. It is a much more of an action type of collar for our dog. So again, just a reminder, our static flat collar is only going to give that sort of feedback for our dog. So we are going to tend to find a little bit of space just behind the neck. Whereas the Martingale is more of an action collar. So it's sort of like a slip leash in the way that it does provide a little bit of that tension. So it's a more of a pressure on, pressure off system that we can work with our dogs. So it can be a great tool. It's not one that we use very regularly, only because I don't really have a brand that I recommend that has lasted quite a while. Most of the time I find that they kind of like fall apart. For whatever reason, if you're a Martingale collar and you've got a really great product, fantastic. I just have never personally found one, so I don't usually recommend it. Benefits of the Martingale, really easy to use. You just use your static leash, you can just pop it on. It's more of an action collar. So again, I prefer that for most people when they are working on their loose leash walking to provide a little bit more of that feedback for dogs that might need a touch more of that feedback. For whatever reason, some dogs don't love the sound of that. And so a lot of dogs will go, I don't really like it when it has that clicking noise. If you can kind of hear that. So a lot of dogs don't like that, and then it kind of helps out with their loose leash walking as well too. Detractors of the Martingale collar is it tends to fall again down to that neck. So we want it to sit, I should have said that as well too. We want it to sit just high up and underneath the chin, just behind the ears. But again, if your dog is really nicely loose leash walking, the whole thing is going to be super, super wide, and it tends to just fall down to the base of the neck. So in the cases that we do need to give that feedback, it's already fallen down as well too. So not my favorite piece of equipment, but some people find great success using these. We've used them before with other dogs, have no problems with them by any means. But usually I'll reach for a slip leash if I need more of an action collar or leash with a dog first. But again, some people prefer these. All right, another very common and well-loved piece of equipment that will be a little bit controversial is the Halti. Haltis are great in the way that it does provide a little bit more of that feedback for the dog. So most Haltis, how they're gonna sit is this is going to be around your dog's neck, so it unclips, clip it around the dog, and then this piece at the front here goes through the nose. So imagine this is the neck, this is the nose of your dog. This clip here then clips on kind of like a safety just to your dog's flat collar or Martingale or whatever you've got on them, so that if for whatever reason it comes off, that at least it's still clipped onto the to a piece of equipment that your leash is attached to. Your leash comes just on this little spot right here. So when the Halti is in action, so we've got the clip here and the leash is going to be here. It gives action usually, so if the dog starts coming out in front, it'll give action from here, and it does have a pressure on and pressure off system as well too. What this will do though, however, as well, is start to twist the neck. Some dogs really don't enjoy the feel of the Halti when it does that, and so they learn, oh, fantastic, when I just walk next to you, I will get reinforcement for that. You know, usually we're providing a lot of like food or toys, whatever the dog is wanting to work for, pats, cuddles, praise. So when they're walking next to us, they don't feel any of that pressure and tension, and they can continue to walk nicely. Fantastic. So that's the benefit of it, is it can be very easy for dogs to learn that when I'm just next to my human, I don't feel any of that pressure that I don't like. The biggest downfall of the Halti, which is kind of our biggest gripe as dog trainers, is this takes a long time to condition. So for anybody who's like put on a different piece of a jewelry before, like an easy one is rings. If you've gotten married in the past and you have your ring on for the very first time or engaged or whatever, or just a different piece of jewelry, you're like, oh, that kind of feels weird, and you're kind of just playing around with it all the time. It's the same thing for dogs. So many people say, oh, we tried the Halti, but they just hated it because the dog, the entire walk is just trying to get that off. So the dog might not be pulling, but it's probably because they're very uncomfortable and don't really understand how this tool works. For most of our pet dog clients, if this takes about 2 to 4 weeks, but they want results right away, it's very hard to go, hey, just like take it easy on your walks, make sure that this is really well conditioned before you actually even start working on your walk. That's kind of a hard bargain to ask for. So if you're wanting something more immediate, because most dogs have worn collars before, most of those other pieces of equipment are going to be a little bit easier to try right now. But again, if the Halti feels a little bit more comfortable for you, or you've gone through the gamut of everything else, make sure that you have a bit of a conditioning process first. So what that means is I want the dog to feel super comfortable with this piece on its nose and not trying to claw it off. So usually we use a lot of just luring through to start with. Then I'll present the Halti. I want the dog busting through that Halti going, yes, this thing means like really good stuff. So creating really good associations to the Halti. And then we can start to add in that little bit of pressure. So when the pressure comes on, move with it this way. If it comes from that way, move with it this way. So just much more time and gentle consideration while we are conditioning using the Halti. So again, the benefits, it's very sensitive for most dogs. They will learn really quickly on a Halti when they understand what that pressure actually means and how to turn it off. Biggest downfall is that it's going to just take a long time to condition the dog. Another thing that I am a little bit uncomfortable with for the Halti is the fact that it does control the head so much. If we don't go through that conditioning process, and say you go out because your dog is a little bit reactive, for example, and it feels that tension that comes on from the Halti, if your dog kind of has a bit of a lunge out at a trigger, it can really put quite a lot of tension on that neck and back, which is pretty unhealthy for most dogs. So be very careful when I consider Haltis. There's so many more considerations that I give. One thing that you can do as an alternative to a Halti, if you are concerned about all of that tension on the neck and the back, and you don't want to do the conditioning as much, is you can use your slip leash in the way of, if you have it really nice and long when you put it on the dog, so if this is going to be the base of the neck, if you just do one loop, slip it over the dog's head, what that then becomes, so if this is your dog's head, the tension now is coming from the back of the neck and through the nose here. So it's not going to be twisting it around as it gives that pressure. The pressure still is coming from the back, keeping your dog's neck and spine all in line. So less dangerous situation using that. But again, some people much prefer the Halti. They've used it with their previous dogs for whatever reason. We're more than happy to use the Halti. It also doesn't have as much of a directional type of feedback for us in the way of like teaching obedience as well. So that's also a consideration that we use too. So Haltis can be great, but have their considerations as well. All right, even more controversial than the Halti is going to be the prong collar. Depending on where you are, you may or may not be able to use a prong collar, but we're going to talk about it as if you can use it just as an option as well. This is a mini one that comes in two other bigger sizes. For most dogs, like most of your medium type of size dogs, we're going to use that middle size. I've probably only seen like maybe 5 dogs or something use the extra large, like the very biggest one of the prong collar. And these are for obviously our little bit of a smaller dogs, or dogs that we want to provide a little bit more of that like finite information, if that makes sense. Now, it does look terrifying. I will not give any doubt to that. But the thing with the prong collar is it's one of the safest pieces of equipment that we can use. It has a lockout, so it should be quite snug when it sits on your dog. This is where it attaches to. This is your dead ring where it's not actually going to do anything for the dog. So this is your action ring. And so the feedback that it gives, it actually has a lockout feature. You won't be able to go any tighter than what you set it to. So that is how the prong collar goes on and off. Again, pressure system on and off for the prong collar. These little prongs do, like contrary to popular belief, do not have any sharp edges. They sit right on the surface of the dog. And again, it's more of a very sensitive feedback system for the dog. Like the slip leash, it does give feedback all the way around. The only spot that's going to be dead in terms of feedback is just these points right here where we have the leash attached to. And again, there's just no prongs there essentially. The prong collar can be fantastic in the way that it doesn't tend to fall down as much. And I can be even more sensitive and nuanced using a prong collar than I can a flat collar, slip leash, or any other piece of equipment that we've seen so far. It's directional, meaning that if it comes from this direction, I want the dog coming this way. If it comes from this direction, I want the dog going this way, this. You're getting the idea, right? It can be super, super directional and can give a lot more clear feedback to our dogs. So I love the prong collar. When would we use a prong collar for loose leash walking? Again, with maybe very heavy pullers or just ones that we've again gone through the gauntlet of everything else. And again, it can give us really sensitive feedback of that pressure on and off. Unfortunately, again, it's one of the pieces of equipment that you might not be able to use depending on where you are, so it might not be accessible to you. A downfall of the prong collar is with the pinching that you have to do to actually pinch the prongs to get in and out of it. You might just need a safety clip as well too. So you might just need a couple pieces of equipment that might feel a little bit bulky. So then what this would probably do is, or this would do for you, is hook onto that ring, and then that would be hooked onto your dog's flat collar, for example. Particularly with the smaller size of the prong collar, they can get a little bit more bent. It's a little less sturdy than like the medium size, for example. So I have seen prong collars actually get too loose and then slip off. That then is your safety. So if it slips off, it's attached to the dog's flat collar, so the dog's not going anywhere as well. So it just feels a little bit bulky for some people. It looks scary. That's probably the biggest like detractor of it, is most people have a really hard time getting their head around it when they first start using it. But for me, it's probably one of my most favorite pieces of equipment to use in the way that I can use it so nuanced, so sensitively, and so safely as well too. So they get a really bad name, and again, depending on where you are, you may or may not be able to use it, but that's a prong collar. All right, the last of our controversials is an e-collar. Again, same thing, depending on where you are, you may or may not be able to use an e-collar depending on where you are. What an e-collar does is it has two pieces. So this is just an attachment with the e-collar. This is the receiver, and this is your transmitter. This is called a mini educator. It's made by Ecollar Technologies. There's plenty of different brands that are out there. Biggest recommendation for e-collars is don't go cheap. Don't buy the, $50 one on Amazon that has 10 levels. They can be very unreliable. So get one that is very good quality. I'm always really conscious about people's back pockets, but really if you want to do e-collar training, don't skimp out on it. So with the e-collar, how it works, with this mini educator of the Ecollar Technologies, this one has 127 different levels. It provides a little bit of a stimulation through these prongs that come through. So it tends to sit nice and high up on the dog's neck, again, nice and sensitive for the dog, and it provides that little bit of stimulation. This does require quite a lot of conditioning. So telling the dog what it actually means when that stimulation comes on. There's cowboys that everybody's heard of that just, turn it up, try and do a recall with the e-collar. And once the dog figures out, oh, the pressure turns off when I come back to you, I'm just not gonna leave your sight. That's bad e-collar training. We can be very nuanced with this tool as well. So the e-collar, most e-collars will also have a function of a vibrate function. Don't be fooled thinking, oh, that's much kinder for my dog. The vibration can be quite intense for a lot of dogs. For example, again, this one has 127 different levels of the e-collar. So if I turn this one on, most of the time I'll flick that on with the receiver. And to make sure that it's on, the first time that I can actually feel my e-collar is at a level 8. It feels like a tiny little, it's just a stimulation, I don't know, tiny little tingling. It is gonna be an aversive tool for our dog of like, hey, I want you to turn that off, but not in the way of like, oh my gosh, this is super stressful for me. Most of the time it's like, oh, that's just like kind of annoying, like someone's just tapping me on the shoulder. So again, 127 different levels. My Malinois works on a level 6. I cannot feel it on my arm until a level 8. So we're working on really low levels. Never have I ever gone over 30 for a dog at this stage in my training. We probably need to wind it back, and there's a whole different conversation around some of those things. There are some really tough dogs, but again, we should be pretty nuanced with some of our e-collar training. And if we use higher levels, we should have a reason for doing that as well too. Again, whole different conversation. There's plenty of different ways to train e-collar. Biggest downfall of the e-collars, it takes a lot of time. We sort of need a level of training with our dogs before I personally like to introduce the e-collar. So I am not teaching new behaviors on an e-collar generally. I am more working with the behaviors that the dog knows to then go, hey, I would like you to do this, so that when it does, if I need you to do it and you feel that pressure, you know how to turn it off straight away. So it gives us a level of off-leash freedom. So I should be talking still about detractors. It still takes a little bit of time for all of the conditioning for the actual e-collar. That's really the biggest thing. Charging for some people is another like detractor for it. Like, oh, I keep forgetting to charge my e-collar. I can't use it every time I want to because I keep forgetting about it. So that's another detractor as well too. It's not always at the ready for you. So many positives. All right, so the benefits of using the e-collar, it's essentially it's an external touch point for you and your dog. So you don't need your long leash, you don't need all that stuff. All you need is a remote once you have your e-collar all conditioned up for your dog. So you can work on recalls, you can do distance drops. It's a very safe tool. Most e-collars can work at the beach as well, so they can get wet and things. They're just very durable pieces of equipment that allow so much freedom for your dog. So they can be very nuanced in that way. Oh, another detractor, that's what I was thinking of, another detractor of your e-collar is it's not actually directional. So again, we need that level of general understanding for our dog. So for example, with come, if I said come and then the dog doesn't know what it means, I put the stimulation on, there's no way of guiding the dog back in if they really don't know what a recall is. So detractor of the e-collar. Fantastic. I love this piece of equipment. When we talk about it for loose leash walking specifically, it's usually one that we can layer on if we want a little bit more of that off leash, like kind of stay in my, like we're not going to call it loose leash walking because they would be off leash on the e-collar. But that can be a little bit more of that like stay in this general vicinity type of thing on off leash, and then usually sending them back out into the environment. Again, I probably wouldn't use the e-collar for like that sort of proximity training until we had a level of understanding with our dogs, but it can be really useful for that. It's not the first piece of equipment that I reach for by any means for loose leash walking, particularly with most of my pet dog clients that don't want to have an extra thing that they need to go out and buy and charge and do all the stuff. Most people are families, and it's just too much for them. But it is something that if we want that next level, an e-collar can provide that. So again, depending on where you are, you may or may not be able to use it, but it is one of my favorite pieces for the upper level stuff that we do with our dogs. And last but not least, we went through a whole bunch of controversial things. One of the least controversial things that we can have on us is our treat pouch, although I'll probably get some hate in the comments potentially. There are some people who don't believe in doing any sort of food or positive reinforcement with their leash training, which is totally fine. You can teach a dog that, but this is one of our favorite pieces of equipment for teaching our dog to loose leash walk. We tend to enjoy using Prime 100 with our dogs. It's a little bit stinkier, a little bit more, just more appetizing for them, particularly here in Queensland when it does get very hot and humid for our dogs. Having the Prime 100 as a high value reward can help out to build a lot of value in the space around me. So we do a lot of reinforcement for our dogs, and using a treat pouch is going to be the best way to do that. Detractors, a lot of people don't love the bulkiness of having a treat pouch. We might forget about it or things like that. So you don't need a treat pouch. As long as you've got pockets, you can totally just whack a couple treats in your pockets so that you're practicing that reinforcement and rewards for being close by to you when you're working on your loose leash walking. Positives of it, makes it everything much cleaner. You don't have to worry about having the food in your pockets or anything like that, particularly if you have a very, very food motivated dog. They will likely go in and clean out your pockets and just help you out later. So a treat pouch can help to mitigate that as well. And hopefully not very controversial as well too. We have a clicker. My dog is deaf, so I can do that around him. I've got Bear just in the room, just here with me. If you have a dog that's clicker trained at home, I apologize already. The clicker is a fantastic tool as well. We don't generally use it with our pet dog clients only because it's just one more thing that we have to hold on to. And again, with our leash walking and maybe using food as well too, it's just an extra thing. But it can be very, very clear and concise. What we use instead more is our voice commands. So marking and rewarding with yes or good or whatever our clients prefer to use. The clicker is a very monotone, it's unemotional, sounds the same every single time that you use it. So there's a lot of benefits of using the clicker for us. Again, detractor, most people don't want to carry an extra thing in their pockets or in their hands as they have their leash and their food and they're doing all the stuff. Feels like you need 16 hands for dog training already, so it just makes it a little bit more difficult when we're using it for loose leash walking.
But again, a really fantastic tool, particularly when we want to work on a lot of reward-based for our dogs staying in position kind of around us. All right, and that's it. I know it took a long time to get through. There's a ton of equipment that we went through. Hopefully you can kind of determine what's going to be most useful and most comfortable for you and your dog. If you have any questions or feel like we missed out on maybe one of your favorite pieces of equipment, please let me know. I'm happy to answer and facilitate any questions kind of in the comments as well. So please leave a comment if there's anything that wasn't quite clear for you, or if you wanted a second take on what might work best for you and your dog. And then hopefully we can do a little bit of demonstration with some of these equipment later on, if that is what everybody wants to see. Thank you very much for watching. It's very silly, but of course, if you are enjoying these videos, please subscribe, please like, do all the things. It just helps more people like you find us so that we can keep providing great dog training information with a nice, balanced, and open approach to everything. Thank you.